Gamar Jobat, that is hello in my native Georgian. I come from Georgia in Europe. And welcome to Sapere Aude number 220. And today's topic is very interesting in the sense that it covers one new dimension for Sapere Aude, and that is alchemy in the Élus Coëns. And we will start discovering the Martinist tradition. So the lecture will be delivered by Brother Paul Edward Rana, SIIL, Grandmaster of Ordre Martiniste Souverains. So in continuation of the series of public lectures, we have the honor to host Brother Paul Edward Rana, who has been a Master Mason since 2007 and a member of the Scottish Rite since 2008. He's a past master of multiple Martinist, Rosicrucian, and Golden Dawn bodies, an ordained bishop with French, Gnostic, and Orthodox Apostolic succession, and serves as the current Grandmaster of the Order Martiniste Souverains. He also currently serves as Venerable Master of the Austin Scottish Rite Collegium Ritualis Scorsese. He writes and lectures internationally on Kabbalah, Alchemy, Rosicrucianism, Gnosticism, Hermetism, Hermeticism, and initiatory bodies of the Western esoteric tradition. As a translator, author, and editor, he has published over 25 volumes of French haute-grade esotericism, or higher degrees esotericism, and related currents. He is also fifth Dan black belt master in multiple schools of martial arts, with 20 years of experience teaching martial arts and yoga. Later on, I will share the link to different additional resources you may enjoy to find out more of Brother Paul's background and, of course, the items we briefly covered in the introduction. First of all, thank you so much, Brother Paul, finding your time.
So thank you very much for that introduction, brother, and for all the work that you do with Sapere Aude and your lectures, offering this forum and this medium for us to meet and discuss with each other Masonry, esotericism, and its related currents. Today, and what's excellent is he already gave the preamble, so I don't have to mention that this is not my opinions I express today. Do not express any Grand Lodge, any Masonic body, or body of Masons of any kind. This is all academic. This is all independent research that I've done myself. And it all falls under the Martinist order, which is not a Masonic order, is an independent rite, and falls under my personal research. So today we're going to talk about alchemy in the Élus Coëns. Now, the Élus Coëns has become more and more in the front lines of esotericism as documents are beginning released from both Martinists and non-Martinists alike around the world. And it has been around since the 1750s. We will talk a little bit about the history, but tonight our goal is not to have a cursory overview of Martinism, not the general principles that it was a Masonic order in the 1750s, or branched out of Freemasonry, that it was mystical, magical, had active theurgy and ceremonial magic, but rather our purpose is to dive into specifics about some of the operations and some of the processes that occur in the first 7 degrees specifically. So with that, we're going to get started. And I'm going to plug right off the bat. If you have a cell phone, you can pull out and take a picture of that QR code or hold your camera up and click that to go to a series of resources, which will also be in the chat. And this gives you additional resources about the things we're going to talk about today. The YouTube has about 80 hours of videos on there, lectures like this. There's a ton of books available on the bookstore, as well as free books available on academia. So, like I said, we're going into deep...
Brother Paul.
Yes, sir.
Just one interruption, sorry for that. I guess you're using 2 screens. And right now you're looking at the main one. So for the recording purposes, if you will be looking at not that one, the other one. You're using 3 screens.
You want me to look in the center?
Yeah, okay. For the recording, it would be better to have an eye contact. It doesn't really kind of, but still, just to have that in mind. That's minor
Sure.
nuance.
You got it. Is that better for you?
Sorry.
Is
Yeah,
that
great.
okay? Excellent. You know what? I can do it just like that anyways. Very good. So again, that's our first link of resources. You'll have several resources offered to you today. But getting into the talk. So like I said, we're going into the depths of this tradition. And we're not going to be doing I have already dozens of hours of introduction to this tradition. And you've had Martinists on your channel recently talking about the tradition. So we're going to go deeper into it. If you'd like to have a review of the entire tradition, this video is available on my YouTube, and it is a 2-hour introduction into all the grades of the order itself. With that being said, we'll still do a very brief introduction into this tradition. So it was founded by Martin de Pasquale, also known as the Masonic Magician. His full name, deep breath, Jacques Liran Joachim de la Tour de la Casa de Martin de Pasquale. Say that 10 times fast. So he was born 1727 or so, likely Grenoble, France. And we know that he died in 1774 in Saint-Domingue or Haiti. We see here his signature. We see one of his silhouettes, real or not, but it's still a traditional silhouette of him. And a charter that was supposedly given to his father by Prince Bonnie Charlie himself, Charles Edward Stewart II. This is highly debated amongst different historians, some which contest its authenticity, some which contest that it is fake. Regardless, he came on the Masonic scene circa 1754 and started founding Masonic lodges, specifically Les Juges Écossais in Montpellier. The term judge or judge later became part of the title of the highest ranking members of the Élus Coëns, his Masonic mystical branch. It also links into the term souverain juge, or sovereign judge, which links into later Martinist terms of SI, superior inconnue. In 1760, he founded the Temple Coën in Bordeaux, and in 1764, he founded the France Élus Écossais. During these years, he began developing his right of the Élus Coën, and on March 21st, 1767, he officially founded the order's Sovereign Tribunal, or the First Grand Council of Martinism, or Martinesism, as it is known under his name. They had temples all over France, and his strict regimen of prayer, internal and external cleanliness, spiritual aspiration, and magical discipline spread quickly through the Enlightenment era of France. To students who were desperately in need of a return to the magic and romance of a spiritually untouched by so-called modern science and skepticism of the time. Remember, this is the rise of rationalism. This is the rise of skepticism. He offered a return to spirituality, a return to religion on one's own terms. Very Gnostic in some senses, very Kabbalistic in other senses, but extremely unique and as a sort of bridge between these two major traditions. One Élus Coën in 1788, at his reception, quoted that the Élus Coën is an order that, having for goal to bring man back to his glorious origin, leads him by the hand by teaching him to know himself and to consider his relationships with the entire nature, of which he was to be the center, had he not fallen from his origin, and finally to recognize the supreme being from which he is emanated. A century later, Papus, or Dr. Gerard Ancasse, wrote that the purpose of Martinism is the acquisition, through purity of the body, soul, and spirit, of powers that enable man to communicate with invisible beings, those that churches call angels, and to thereby reach not only personal reintegration of the operator, but also that of all his disciples of goodwill. So much has been said and written about this tradition. There's been a lot of confusion about the tradition as well. You can see our other videos and the wealth of documents we've published for free on academia, or our hardcover books for details about the tradition itself. But let's get into a little deeper what made this different from basic masonry of the time, or even haute grade Écossais masonry of France at the time, was its focus on magic and mysticism, its operative Kabbalah, its operative theurgy, and taking a Gnostic worldview and bringing one into it so you live it through a visceral series of initiations and personal practices. This was not some mundane or secular organization in which you come in and just take oaths and talk about virtues. Each initiation was very visceral. You're living the myth. You're living the myth of the origin of the creation, of the fall of man, of the suffering of man, and of man's attempt to climb back towards the light, up that ladder of heaven. Here you see 3 tableaux. Some people call them the Serpent Diagrams. They are 22 tableaux that describe the initiatory process of the Élus Coëns. They specifically describe the processes of the first 3 classes, and then a little bit in the later degrees. We see here on the left an image of man being emanated, being born within the 6 thoughts, the hexagram, which is the male and the female connected, deity and the universe connected. Within the bosom of the eternal, man was emanated as the image of God, to do his work, to rule the birds of the air, the beasts of the field, the fish of the sea, to name everything, and specifically in the Martinist tradition, to bring back the fallen spirits, the first spirits with free will that chose to be separate from deity, that chose to have an independent existence, that chose to create on their own. These spirits, or angels, we could say, were the first ones to fall and to create evil. A beautiful thing about this in the Martinist tradition is it reconciles that age-long question of the origin of evil, of how could you have a beneficent, all-knowing deity that has allowed evil? And to sum it up very quickly, he summarizes that deity gave all his beings free will, and he has no interaction with secondary causes. If he was to control secondary causes, i.e. his creatures, they would not have free will, which is of utmost importance to this tradition. So due to their free will, these first spirits caused what in Kabbalah would be known as the Shavira, the breaking of the Sephiroth, the breaking of the vessels, which caused the universe to shatter, demons to come about, the material universe to be born, pain and suffering and time and old age and death to come about. And man's job was to go and take these fallen spirits, bring them back to the light, to bring them back to the unity, back to order. You might notice on the left that diagram is quite similar to some depictions of the common tree of life, especially the tree of life known after the Golden Dawn. You might notice in the center the highlighting of the hexagram. This is man doing his work, naming the creatures, working within the sphere of deity. And on the right is the perfection, after everything falls and shatters, of bringing everything back together, where the sun above and the sun below mirror and unite with each other. So you went through this visceral initiation, and despite that this order has been around since the 1750s, and there's been a lot written about it, most documents from the 1800s, 1900s, and even 21st century are using secondary or tertiary sources. We're only now seeing groups publish primary sources. And even in those primary sources, there's a lot of confusion on the grades. Some people think that the first 3 degrees are the common blue craft degrees of apprentice, companion or fellow craft, and master. But that can't be more further from the truth. We have some examples of these grades from the Baylot manuscript, FM 415 at Bibliothèque Nationale de France, which is the oldest document of the Ordre du Roi Secret, that eventually evolved into the Franken manuscript, and eventually evolved into the ancient accepted Scottish Rite. If you're interested in this, I was the first one to translate the Élus Coëns portion, and you can find it free in my academia, or you can buy a hardcover. This is the proper grade list, rectified of the tradition. The table goes from top to bottom. It begins with the first 3 degrees, the symbolic, apprentice, companion, master. But again, these are not the basic, these are not the mainstream Masonic blue degrees. It has skeletons of those, but has this highly visceral, Kabbalistic, Gnostic, Theosophic, Theosophy meaning Yakabuma, and 1600s Theosophy, not the later 1800s Theosophy of Blavatsky. You go through this visceral initiation in which you experience things which we'll talk about in depth more. Then you come into the 4th degree of Perfect Master. That title is familiar in other Ecosse degrees. But what I want to point out here is that there are 4 classifications of these degrees. There's 11 degrees. There are 5 elections or sashes, 5 bands with various colors: blue, black, red, green, and white. There are also 7 specific classes: Symbolic Lodge, Chapter of Élus, Conclave of the Coën, Conclave of Grand Architects, the Grand Chapter, the Porch of the Tribunal, and finally the Sovereign Tribunal. Lastly, there's a series of 3 overarching classes with a secret hidden 4th. You see this 3 plus 1 very often in Pasquale's teachings. First is the porch, so you're at the porch of the temple, waiting to enter in. You have the temple itself. You have the sanctuary itself, which is very akin to the holy place in the tabernacle or the temple. And then finally, the Holy of Holies, the Sanctum Sanctorum. So we always have to keep in mind these 4 classifications when we're understanding these degrees. Another way to look at this is here. The degrees go down in the left column, they go up in the right. Blue, black, red, green, white. We're going to primarily focus upon these first degrees, blue, black, and red, and the alchemical processes that occur within these degrees. Another thing to point out is that most Reconstructionist Élus Coëns orders and Martinist orders do not work these degrees properly. Most of them jump directly to 7th degree, Maître Élus Coëns. Whoops. However, they're actually operating the 4th degree. They're misunderstanding their sources. So today's one of the first times that we are really revealing the true essence of the first 3 blue degrees, and then the 4th, 5th, and 6th degrees. There's actually an error here. Those 4, 5, 6. The 5, 6, 7 should be under red. There's an error on that, but that's okay. And this is how we work the degrees within my particular Martinist organization, the Ordre Martiniste Souverains. Everyone starts at the bottom of the tree, the bottom of the candelabra, with the first 3 traditional Martinist degrees. Then we initiate and ordain into the Rose Croix d'Orient, a French Rosicrucian tradition. We also ordain into the minor and major apostolic orders. And then we have, on the left, the Coën path, with every degree, all 11. On the right, the CBCS path. We do not make Masons, so we do not do the first 2 degrees. There was a lecture just 2 weeks ago, highly attended by a reputable individual, who talked about how CBCS has, for 200 years, operated both as a Martinist current and as a Masonic current, and they've coexisted in that nice balance. We also initiate into the Frère d'Orient, a French system by Demetrius Platosemelas, and finally, capstone with his Isi Isia, Eques a Sancti Ioannes Evangelista, Eques a Sancti Ioannes Apostolica. Enough about that, though. Our key sources tonight, so that was your introduction to Coën. If you're confused, there's a lot of videos out there I've published to give you more information. But our key sources today are all those primary sources that talk about what actually occurs in these first 7 degrees. Most of these have only seen the light of day in the past few years, especially in English. I and Alex Bushman just published this Lessons of Lyon a couple months ago. I published 10 Instructions of Men Desire about 2 years ago. And then all these manuscripts from Grenoble we've been publishing over the last several years. So take a look at our resources for more of this information. But these are the primary sources we are dealing with today. Specifically, the Lessons of Lyon. This book is available direct, or you can get a signed copy if you're interested as well. It's got 500 footnotes of commentary. It's the first English translation, and we've cross-referenced it with every initiation and every other major source. Our other major source is 10 Instructions to Men Desire by Saint Martin himself. The reason I'm showing these sources is that people often say when I talk about alchemy and the Élus Coëns and these magical operations, they like to say it's fake. People like to throw character attacks or red herrings and say these don't exist. Saint Martin never said that. Well, right here we have his handwritten notes saying these things. We're going to use this diagram of the universal table to understand the Martinist tradition, the degrees, the body of man, and the structure of the universe. This is the main document, main diagram we're going to use and discuss today. Since we're discussing alchemy, I also have to mention that we are not talking about the classical alchemy of the 7 operations of the planets, as we see here in Miletus' Azoth. We're not even talking about necessarily Basil Valentine's 12 keys, though these diagrams keep them in mind. You will see something very similar to these much later, and you see perhaps a link to where Pasquale got some of his inspiration. We're also not talking about the fantastic Splendor Solis with its 4, 7, 7, and 4 sequences. And again, we have videos on that if you're interested in there. All these sequences of classical alchemy are essential to the tradition, but we show you this to show you how different alchemy is across the board. Each alchemist has his own individuated system, his own individuated way of working the schema. Though they might be working a 7-stage system, each one of these is very different. Each alchemist is writing a sort of memoir about how they did the process. And often they're out of order, so you have to figure that out. Same thing goes with the 12 series sequences. And again, just showing you this to show how diverse the alchemical tradition is, and that every text has to be approached on its own terms rather than pushing another system onto it. The same even occurs with a 3-step sequence, the most simple, of black, white, and red, or negredo, albedo, rubedo. And if you're in the Scottish Rite, you're familiar with these terms, at least with our caps to a degree. But even this, we're doing something very different. This is a traditional interpretation of the 3 alchemical principles of mercury, sulfur, and salt within man. Mercury being the spirit above, sulfur being his soul, the oil of the plant, what makes it unique, what makes him unique, what animates him. Salt being his material body. You could also call this the mercury his neshama in Kabbalah, sulfur his ruach in Kabbalah, and salt his nefesh or guf in Kabbalah. However, my other image didn't come up. Did a bad transition. There it is. They show it more like this in the Élus Coëns. They take on different forms. Now, mercury becomes solid. It represents the bones. Sulfur is fire, just like it is in most traditions. It represents the blood which animates us and pumps through us. Salt represents the fluid as opposed to the hardened, because it is the salty waters, the saline waters. And I'm just introducing these things slowly, bit by bit, so we start to digest these concepts from Pasquale, Saint Martin, and Willermoz. If you're a member of the CBCS, these things should not be new to you. Your body should be teaching this, because these are the teachings of the highest degrees of the 7th degree Professed Knight and 8th degree Grand Professed Knight. We see on the left, all 3 of these are Jean-Baptiste Willermoz's handwriting. In the center are the secret instructions of the Grand Professe. On the left and right are his versions of the Universal Table. Notice his handwriting. His drawing skills weren't very good. And again, if you're not familiar with this, here's a 90-minute video fully explaining the Universal Table. And we're going to jump off using this symbol set to talk about the alchemical processes of the Élus Coëns tradition. So again, this is our main diagram. It's called the Universal Table. It is essentially, you can consider it the tree of life of Martinism, the Élus Coëns, and the CBCS. It is the primary diagram which illustrates the cosmology of the universe, how it was formed, the cosmology of man, and how man can learn to understand himself within this sphere of reality, and how he can ascend through these spheres back to that original oneness, to the divine immensity, to the pleroma of the Gnostics, to the reintegration of Martinism. We notice first, going bit by bit, 4 main worlds. In bold, the divine immensity, the supercelestial immensity, the celestial immensity, and the terrestrial immensity. These could be akin to the 4 worlds of the Kabbalah: Absolute, Bria, Yetzirah, Asiya. But be careful of not conflating terms. It's just a good way to start getting familiar with it. The divine immensity is that divine pleroma, that which is untouchable, that which is unknowable. And that's why the diagram ends just touching the tip, similar to the Hebrew Yud, that just touches the tip of deity and then extends the seed of life down into creation. The supercelestial is the bosom in which everything is emanated. And notice, I keep saying emanated, not created. The idea of Kabbalah and Élus Coëns is that everything poured out from deity and is not separate from deity. Creation postulates a separation. Emanation postulates we are all part of the same thing, but maybe we have forgotten that secret. We've forgotten how to utilize it. We've forgotten how to understand it. And then celestial could be like Yetzirah, the actual sphere in which all of these things live, move, and have their being. And then finally, in the center and the bottom is the terrestrial, earth, Asiya, the physical created world in which we live and move. You'll also notice there are 11 spheres. That number could be akin to the 10 spheres of the Tree of Life and Da'at, but again, I would be careful of putting too much on that. And I won't go too much into that because it's not that important for today's talk. What is most important are these 3 circles right here. Namely, Saturn, the Sun, and Earth, the sensible. And we see those here, Saturn, the Sun, and Earth. These are the 3 circles that make up the body of the universe and of man. They also carry the connotation of sulfur, salt, and mercury. And more specifically, each sphere is ruled by a class of spirits. And if that's a little too out there for you, consider them as archetypes. Consider them as Platonic archetypes. The spirits of the central fire axis are the activating force of nature. It is the fire that made everything move. It is the Big Bang, if you want to make it a little more down to earth. The second sphere, the aquatic spirits of the crystalline or the salty waters, the saline waters, are the cooling of that universe. So this could be, if you take quantum physics, this could be the cooling as everything starts to expand. Because without that cooling, it would just keep burning and burning and burning. You have to have something to temper it. Always a balance. And then the final, the terrestrial or elemental mercurial spirits, are that solidification as each planet comes into a mass or a body. So just another way to look at this. So we're always going to deal with these 3 circles today and this triangle at the bottom, which is known as the terrestrial form. The terrestrial form, which he postulates, is triangular. This is not literal. He's not saying the earth is literally a triangle. He's also not saying that man is a triangle. It is a philosophical concept that man is composed of 3 principles. And we see within that sphere, again, sulfur, mercury, and salt. So we see those principles in the macrocosm and in the microcosm. It's also the symbol of the terrestrial soul of man. So while being his body is ternary, his spirit is ternary as well until it unites with that which it lost. And finally, within the very bottom of the diagram, the center of that triangle is the secret fire, what he calls the lost word, the fire of creation, the fire, the spark of the Gnostics. You could call this the Kia or the Akita in Kabbalah, that secret spark that links man directly to deity, to Atman, to Arik and Pin of the Kabbalists, whatever you want to call it. So our whole talk is about how that secret fire has been trapped by man's fall into creation and matter, because creation occurred with his fall, and now we have matter, and how he can learn to unravel himself from that, regain his lost memory, regain his lost powers, and come back to individuation, or what we call reintegration. Yeah, that's good. One of the key sources, like I said, is Saint Martin's writings, 10 Instructions to Men of Desire, or as he titled it, Instructions for Temples of the Élus Coëns, Elevated to the Greatest Glory of the Eternal. We see again, on the left, a breakdown of deity as one, dividing into 3 principles, salt, sulfur, and mercury, and then reflecting and manifesting in the universe, which together would make a hexagram, right? We see on the right Saint Martin's original handwritten documents about this, and we're going to explore how these interact and how we can free the soul of man trapped within this alembic. So the 3 circles of man and the 4 regions. Like we talked about, these 3 circles are a simpler way of looking at these 3 more complex circles on the left. On the right, that is from Saint Martin's hand. And I've superimposed a square, which is from the Élus Coëns temples. We're always dealing with 3 and 4. Starting simply with the 4. 4 cardinal directions, north, east, south, and west. As Saint Martin states in his Lessons of Lyon, 15th lesson from February 25th, 1774, the 4 regional correspondences. The east is the divine realm. The west is the spiritual. The south is the celestial. The north is the terrestrial. The number 4, division of the universal laws of regeneration. Number 3 is the courses we take, the journeys we make. And then together, all of these will take us back to the 10 eventually. I'm being kind of quick on this because I want to get to the big meat. He also explores in Les Nombres, which Piers Vaughan translated a couple years ago. He also shows in that document, this is his handwritten notes on the left, the demonic regions. How each of these regions have a heavenly and a demonic mirror. Similar to in Kabbalah of the Shem HaMephoresh being angelic and the Goetia being demonic. And if you've ever studied Poke Runyon, he marries these two in his OTA. That you make a talisman with the angel on top, the demon below. So you use the angel to control the demon and therefore become like Solomon, who built the temple without sound of axe, hammer, or any tool of metal. The concept is he used the ring and the laver of brass to build the temple, to use evil for a good purpose. And that's similar to what we're doing here in the Élus Coëns. But first we have to conquer our inner demons. So you start getting introduced to these spirits earlier than you might think, but in a passive state. And classically in the Élus Coëns, they are Belphegor, Beelzebub, Satan, and Leviathan. They also correspond, as we can see, to sulfur, mercury, and salt. Going back to the 3, now that we've seen how there's 4 regions, both heavenly and infernal, we have the 3, the terrestrial form, the terrestrial soul, and the lost word. Those 3 circles are what man is entrapped in. They are the 3 colors of red, white, and black, which, if you are a Martinist initiated, you are very familiar with this symbolism. Unfortunately, 20th century Papuzian Martinism changed the meanings of some of these colors, and what we're dealing with here might be very different from what you learned in Papuzian Martinism, because we're going back to Pasquale, Saint Martin, Willermoz himself. The key essence, though, is that these 3 spheres or shells or coverings or clee are what contain man. They are what gives him his physical body. They're necessary for that, but they also have led to our forgetfulness of who we are. And we want to activate the salt, sulfur, and mercury, these spirits here, in order to start loosening the bonds that tie us to matter. This is similar to the alchemical process of necessity. The initial 7 alchemical processes of necessity, of loosening the bonds of the ruach to the nefesh, of the mind and the spirit, the mind and the soul to the body, and the lower nature. Another way to look at them a little deeper, zooming in on that triangle, is that as we saw, sulfur, salt, mercury, they also have directions, north, south, and west. The blood, the flesh, the bones. They also have correspondences with various archetypes from the Bible. Patriarchs, archetypes, what Pasquale calls types. Cain being sulfur, fire. Remember, and he's the dark pillar, the black pillar. He represents the line of metallurgists, the evil line that did not have intellect but had brute power. Then we have, in the west, the line of Adam. And this was the white pillar. This was the pillar of good, the pillar of uprightness, the pillar of intelligence, the pillar of consciousness, frontal lobe. And then we see Seth, the pillar between the two of them, the one that reconciles them. The line of Seth is said to be the line of the Gnostics, the Kabbalists, the mystics, the magicians. And that is the primary line that the Cohen are working with. We also see the children applied to them later. Ham, Sem or Shem, and Yafet. We're almost done explaining the circles so we can get into the operations. I just want to get some of these concepts around you so it's not totally unfamiliar. These three circles, like we said, sulfur, salt, mercury, have classes of spirits. Spirits of the central fire axis, the ring past naught, a blazing ring of fire that surrounds the universe and keeps the fallen and the created within a limit so that it does not storm the gates of heaven. This is similar to Genesis, talking about the wars that were in heaven, and the flaming sword, which turned every way to keep the way to the tree of life, and protected the tree of life and the garden from the fallen spirits returning in. This myth is classical Kabbalah. It is also highly elucidated in the Golden Dawn's Neophyte initiation. Then we have the aquatic spirits of the crystalline of the waters, the cooling, tempering spirits of the waters. And then we have the material, hardened, terrestrial or elemental spirits. And finally, again, in the very center, at the bottom and the center of the universe, the terrestrial form, man, containing the terrestrial soul and the divine fourfold essence of the lost word. The myth begins in Egypt. The spiritual privation of Egypt, which is both classical Kabbalah, classical Gnosticism, and Martinism. He's drawing upon all these resources to make a holistic view of the Western esoteric tradition. Willermoz states, January 21st, 1774, the sojourn of the Israelites in the land of Egypt, where they are subjugated, can represent the state of man in the bosom of woman, so when you're in the womb, deprived of all faculties, and the privation of his escape and his apprehension. The appearance of the Egyptians who pursue them indicates the continual suffering and struggle of this prison or brief life. The ark in the middle of the sea is the guiding spirit, the good companion defender who helps to make the journey. I'm going to pause there, unquote. Good companion, the guiding spirit. This is extremely important in the Coën. They were the first magical order with a structure to teach unification with the Holy Guardian Angel, or as it's become known, knowledge and conversation of the HGA after Mathers and the Golden Dawn. Much earlier in the 1500s, we had the sacred magic of Brahman the Mage, which highly influenced the Coën, but they took that not as just a separate grimoire. They took that grimoire and made it a practical step-by-step through the initiations, where you begin to work that system in order to attain that unification with a guiding spirit, with a holy guardian angel, with your higher self. So let's continue the quote. The passage of the Red Sea can also be considered as the passage of this life to the other, from the material to the spiritual. The ark stops in the middle of the sea and supports the waters to aid their passage. It is the guiding spirit, the good companion defender. He leads to the port those who follow him with confidence, but he abandons the waters to their natural course for those who disregard or despise him. So this postulates, Pasquale literally postulates a good angel on one shoulder and a bad angel on the other. Kind of like Homer Simpson. Like, it's a joke, but really, he actually postulates that. And man either listens to the insinuations of good or the insinuations of bad. What matters not is that both are talking to him. What matters is what he makes use of his will, of whether or not he chooses to act on the good or the evil. And those who act on good have all the faith and support of deity. Those who act on the evil are abandoned to their own natural courses. The alchemical process we're going to talk about today is primarily this diagram or set of tables, which is extracted directly from 10 Instructions of Saint Martin and the Lessons of Lyon of Jean-Baptiste Willermoz and Saint Martin. It describes, from left to right, the first 3 classes or first 7 grades of the order: the blue, the black, and the red. Each of them has a band or an election, and that's a class of historical figures it is associated with. The first 3 degrees are an election given to all mankind. All mankind has this right. It is their birthright to experience this. The second class, only the Levites. And the Levites are that tribe from eventually the priestly class came from, and the Cohen Hagadol, the high priest of Israel. The only one who was able to enter into the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle, into the Holy of Holies in the temple, and one day a year on Yom Kippur utter the divine word, the divine name. And last, the red class is even more specific. It is the Coëns. It is the modern priests, this specific class. Each of these classes has a process of purification in the initiation, done by an agent for a specific purpose, for a specific alchemical process. Each is also ruled by a planet, and each also occurs within a specific region. The blue class is on Monday, under the rule of Luna or the moon. Now, don't take that literally. It doesn't mean you have to initiate on a Monday. Some people will call me out on that and say, you're not doing it right. We have notes from Saint-Martin and Willermoz stating that they were doing the same thing, that Pasquale was doing the same thing, that often he would initiate a Saturday degree on a Wednesday or a Monday degree on a Wednesday. Pragmatism is always of utmost importance in how I work Martinism with my students. We give you the traditional rules and regulations, but be pragmatic. It's better to do it than to wait until it's perfect, because there will never be a perfect time. So the first set of degrees is on Monday. It's lunar. It's the reflection. And it specifically happens terrestrial. It's in the body. It's material. That operation is for the purpose of a material temporal solve. So think alchemically, a solve, a separation, a breaking of the bonds. This purpose, this is done through the agents. Remember those spirits we talked about? Sulfur, mercury, salt. It is done through those agents. You activate the candidate's inner salt, sulfur, mercury with those powers to start loosening the bonds of matter around him. This is done to activate and react on the form, the body, the essences, the spirit, and the vehicle, your body. This is done to create a connection between your form and your soul, your heart. So this is man coming in for his very first initiation, opening up his, let's say, astral body and beginning to create a connection with his heart, with his spirit. After a period of work in the blue class, which you don't just take your initiation, memorize some catechisms, get the next degree. You go home, you have a bunch of magical work to do. Prayers, operations, rituals, things to study, probably papers to write, lots of things to copy. And then when you do elevate to the second class, the fourth degree, it is done on a Wednesday under the operation of Mercury. This now occurs both within the body terrestrial and the spiritual realm of the celestial. So now we're starting to elevate up. This is the beginning of that change occurring. The purpose of this is a material and a spiritual solve, a separation from the demons, or, if that term is too much from you, from your lower self, from your hang-ups, from your negative inclinations. I can't remember the psychological terms right now. From our hang-ups, from separating from those dark forces within us, our nefesh in Kabbalah. This is done in order to prepare for a coagula with the good spirits. So we have to separate from that which is below in order to begin to receive from that which is above. This is done through a renunciation of the 5 material essences, symbolized by 5 metals and the 5 demonic chiefs. Those are those 4 evil spirits we talked about in the quarters, as well as in the center. So in this degree, the candidate goes to all the quarters and makes a renunciation of these evil forces, of these demonic kings. And they are the classic kings of the Goetia. You're making a renunciation that you will not be ruled by them, that instead you will seek to rule over them in time, that you will put them under heel, like the symbol of the Virgin Mary standing atop the serpent's head. This is done, the purpose, to render one susceptible. Notice it doesn't say to make it happen, but to make you susceptible of becoming a receptacle. Receptacle is a specific term. You're now becoming a vessel for the light. You're no longer just a shell. Your shell is opened from the last operation, and you're going to become a receptacle for the light to come in, for the good spirits, the celestial and terrestrial leaders to come and help influence you through the positive ear, to hear the positive thoughts, to hear good inclinations coming towards you. Finally, in the red class, on Saturday, or Saturn, this occurs within the celestial region. And it is said in this degree, no man can truly attain this degree while in life. It is all an aspiration. Or as I like to say to my karate students, never perfect, always perfecting. So this is an eternal aspiration, and every grade from here up, from 7th degree to 11th, is an aspiration. It is in vanity if we claim that we are true Rokwa or true anything. It's just an aspiration we're trying to forever accomplish. This process is the junction or the union of your purified matter, your body, with the minor spiritual being. So the actual spirit of man, the spirit of Adam Kadmon, the spirit, your personal HCA, to have a union with those two to come together. So this is the first coagula we're starting to have, a union after all this separation. This is done through strong markings, through talismans that are drawn upon you, through hand gestures done upon you with specific divine names, angelic names, and some symbols we'll see in a little bit. The purpose here, again, is to now form the perfect receptacle. So those good spirits can help guide you so you can now actually operate in those three regions, conquer the demonic forces, and be what man was meant to be on the first day, when man fell and failed in his first work. That was a lot, and we're going to return to some of these things through the process. But let me just reiterate that, all of that in a short couple paragraphs. In the blue class, it operates upon the body. The three essences of salt, sulfur, and mercury operate as a lunar alchemical process of solve, of separation. In the black class, these three essences are then purified within the vehicle by the Élus, by your renunciation of the matter, the metals, the demons, through an alchemical process of mercurial reconciliation to prepare you to become a receptacle for the good spirits. Finally, in the third class of the Coëns, the coagula of the spirit may occur through the alchemical operation of Saturn and atonement, resulting in junction or union between the purified matter and the minor spiritual being, creating the heavenly number of 7, the number which God loved most of all, the number of the Elohim, the number of the holy guardian angel in this tradition, as well as in the classical Bible, the number God loved above all. And just again, these are the grades we're dealing with: blue, black, red. There is a typo there. 4, 5, 6, 7 should be under red. Let's get a little deeper into it. First degree, like we said, we're creating a separation. The first degree, man enters into 6 circles, representing the 6 thoughts of the divine, of the creator, the 6 days of creation, because the 7th day is rest. The first thing he sees when he opens his eyes is a blue band, the heavenly skies. He's born in heaven, in the center of the universe. He here retraces what happened at the beginning of time, and man is born perfect, holy, and in the image of deity. But unfortunately, man falls and does not do his work. He makes his own error, just as the first fallen spirits did. This results in him falling to a circle of 2, the number of division, of separation, of confusion. And as we know from the Bible, cultivate the earth. It will produce for you only thorns. So he's fallen into the tomb of matter, and he's covered with the dark triangle of matter, with death, decay, old age, pain, and grief. Through this process, he now begins to work towards, after going through a very visceral process of experiencing how bad life can be, he now starts to try to make a reconciliation. From the 2 to the 5, he has to experience the 5, the demonic spirits, those 5 demonic kings we talked about earlier. After he starts to make a renunciation of them, he can now come into particular master. This degree specifically applies to Noah. I should have said, first degree is about Adam, second degree is about Cain, third degree is about Noah. He passes from the material to the spiritual, from the square to the compass. He's now in a circle of 3, back to that holy number of red, white, and black. Still within the triangle of matter. But here, his body is put into the ark of the covenant, the ark on the waters, And for 40 days and 40 nights, he floats above the waters, and his body begins to putrefy, to separate. Those alchemical principles we talked about begin to separate so that his soul can open up, so he can have that connection back to his original nature. Just a connection right now, just a spark, but he begins to see that light, that glimmer of light. After a long period of workings, he will come into the chapter of the Élus, the second class, the fourth degree, allotted to Abraham. And this degree, he experiences the globe, the offering of the man-made flesh. At his last invocation in the Garden of Olives, there's a series of renunciations. There's a lot of skulls in the Élus Coën. And without getting too deep in giving away too many things, these essences are purified within his vehicle through the renunciation, through separating himself from the below and seeking to unite himself with the above. And finally, we come to the capstone of these first degrees, the temple class, the third class, the third election of Moses, the red sash, fifth degree apprentice to seventh degree master Élus Coën. And we learned that one of the things from the Catechism is say, what is represented to us by the construction of the temple without the aid of tools composed of metals and the different instruments? The construction of the body of man that the grand architect created by his own word. So they're saying that the temple is man himself. Your body is a temple. And that it was constructed without any tool, without any metal. It was constructed by pure spirits, by deity himself. And when I mentioned that most orders, when they have a seventh degree Élus Coën, they're not using this circle you see in the left. They're using this circle you see in the right. They're using a fourth degree circle, not a seventh degree circle. In this degree, we have that unification between the purified matter and the spirit of man, the minor. Saint Martin says in Nombre 44, Saturn corresponds to the head of man, but is not therefore superior to Mercury, which is the principle of life. Saturn can have more than physical laws in it. So we're going above physical into the celestial, into the spiritual now. This is about transcending the physical. But it is the Mercury that must be taken. The head must be severed. The dead head in alchemy. The Sol Salis in alchemy. The head must be removed. The ego. Think of Nebuchadnezzar. The head must be removed before touching the extract of Saturn, because that separation is what makes the preparation for this to occur, for these operations which we're discussing. People like to say that alchemy does not occur in the Élus Coën, but it is very, very clear from the original writings of Saint Martin, Willermoz, and D'auterive that these are processes required. The unfortunate reality is that these degrees are no longer practiced by most orders, and that's why they don't think that alchemy is occurring. All of these are necessary preparations in order to do the higher degrees. Without this preparation, the unification hasn't occurred in order to do the later, more theurgical work, or thaumaturgical work. And like we said, this is about the election of Moses. Moses was the one that climbed the mountain, that saw with his own eyes the spirit of deity in the burning bush, the spirit Eye Ashar Eye, I am that I am. He is the one that came down with 10 positive commandments and saw Israel worshiping a golden calf, broke the positive commandments, went back up, and came back down with the negative commandments, because man was not yet ready to rule himself. Man needed an overruler. Man needed rule and law. He was not ready for the law of liberty, of sovereignty. I'm going to not get too heady in some of these, but Willermoz states in 1776, June 22nd, that Saturday, the day of the week to which these red Coën degrees are conferred, under the sign of Saturn, announces to us that they are purely spiritual. To say that the form is being presumed to be purified by the preceding operations, these operate essentially on the minor spiritual being, on your soul, on the secret fire. These will be demonstrated by examining the different parts of the ceremonial that are observed in these grades. So like we said, in these higher degrees now, the 5th, 6th, 7th, we are returning to the universal table, to these directions of this lost word, of the body of man in the macrocosm to renounce Leviathan, to renounce Barosatan, to renounce Beelzebub, and to also gain the powers of salt, mercury, and sulfur in order to truly be able to operate in these regions, in order to regain what man lost in the fall. Saint-Martin states, July 22nd, 1775, in Lessons of Lyon, the progression from north to west to the south angles in the ordination is to increase the forces as we approach the place of greatest impurity. The south is the realm of demons, which is a bit different from what we're taught in mainstream Masonry or the Golden Dawn. In those traditions, north is the greatest place of darkness, for reasons we know. Here, south is the region of the demons and hell, because it is the hottest. He's literally saying it's the hottest, so it's closer to hell. And there's other reasons too. But we are increasingly strong enemies. Things are getting darker and darker as we go towards the light, just as the light gets darker and darker right before dawn. Through these Cohen grades, the aspirant approaches the darkest aspects of these regions to be marked in classical Hebraic manner, Old Testament style, with the strong 5th degree, doubly strong, and triply strong mark of the Cohens, which is clearly inspired by the blood marking of Passover. Just as the angel of death would pass over the houses of the Hebrews, the atonement of the Cohen class and the marking with this sign empowers the aspirant to actively open these regions, reclaim their power, and operate in these forces. Note, however, that the East is detached. It does not figure into these degrees yet. Because as Saint-Martin states, quote, the East is attached on the impossibility of finding the square or longitude in the earth, represented by the circle detached from the others in the reception of Cohen. He means that heaven, that the East, is so far removed from our material form, we can't even attempt to get there at this current stage until we finish this work. Another way they show this is through the pillars of Yak and Buz, is what they call them. Yak, they say, is he will establish. The power of command, it represents man. Bo represents confusion, the second pillar, the prevarication, the fallen spirits. And he gives a Willermoz gives a very, very long, very interesting lesson about these pillars. But for the sake of time, we're going to skip over that and show that those pillars also represent man and woman. So this is if we're looking west from the east. Adam is in the north, Eve is in the south. Is that correct? Whatever. Either way, Adam's in the north, Eve's in the south. When we consider the symbol that north represents the inferiority of woman or Luna, and that the south, Yak, is a superiority of man and the soul, we should be careful not to take these literally. Don't take them literally as the genders of man and woman. They're not saying that woman is inferior and man is better. They are saying that allegorically, figuratively, that the conscious mind should rule the subconscious mind, that the positive should integrate the negative. The whole goal of this is that these two, which were split in the beginning, which were once Adam Kadmon, one united genderless being, should be reunited, that man was separated into Adam and Eve, and they should be reconciled back to the harmony before the split, the fall, the Shavira, the shattering of Adam Kadmon. They give us some signs that we're doing the work right. These signs begin in the 4th degree. The circumcision of Abraham, Moses and the 4 horns in the corners of his altar, the Tav marked by the angel in the vision of Ezekiel. This is also the Tav drawn upon the doors at Passover. The receptacle of the dying Christ, and the dot, the point, the unity which leads us. And Saint-Martin gives a great lesson on this, which I'm going to skip over just for the sake of time. The whole point is now we're going from receptacles to real beings, that we are now able to contain the light, by suppressing the darkness within. It's classical Kabbalah, it's classical Gnosticism, classical alchemy, done in an initiatory step-by-step way. We're reliving the work of the 12 Israelite patriarchs, of the 12 Ishmaelite patriarchs, of the 12 apostles, with Christ in the center. That makes the 36 decanates of the zodiac, and the sun in the center as the king ruling the universe. He says that we cannot give ourselves faith. We must obtain it. It's not enough just to believe. You have to actually have experience and gnosis. Faith is just a substitute. He says that the 40 days represent, we must stay in purification for 40 days. This represents the alchemical month of 40 days, the Sapere Aude of 40 in the Tree of Life in 4 worlds, as well as numerous other biblical references. Samaritan also says, at death, men see their good and bad angel. Our work is to unite with that good angel and to learn to control and use our bad angel for good. Samaritan also states that doing this work, uniting with your angel, is what makes you a Cohen. You're not a Cohen until this occurs. It doesn't matter what title you have, what grade. Definition of the word Cohen, which means incorporization, or making it in the body, of that minor spiritual being, or its junction with the corporeal principle of its form. It also signifies the pain and suffering to which he is subjected by its union contrary to nature, meaning that the body is contrary to your divine soul, and that you're always going to have pain as long as you're living in the body. But our goal, like in classical Kabbalah, is to make the kingdom of heaven. This is not a purely dualistic Gnostic tradition where matter bad, spirit good. We're to transcend those things. This is done through the consecration of the character W, or W, which you may recognize from various other degrees and various other rites. This should be being used in the CBCS 4th degree. They say the power of the ordination of W, which you receive in your heart, carries the purification. It is the imposition of the hands of the high priest. Consider that Jewish hand blessing sign. The high priest upon the head of the victim, they call you. The descent of the fire, which creates union. There are 3 types of temples. This probably isn't important for now. I know that we're getting to about an hour and about 7 minutes, I think. But there's 3 temples. We operate upon our body, upon the macrocosm, and then upon the spiritual universe itself. And this all corresponds to the primary forces the Cohen is working with: the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and man himself. And these are characterized as thought, the thought of the Father, the will and the word of the Son, the action of the Holy Spirit, and the operation of man. Man has to be here in order to put the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit into action. Again, we're progressing through these temples, through these bands. Only after completing this work of the 7th degree, Mercurial Cohen, is one able to properly perform the equinox operations, in which over 3 days, every spring and fall equinox, the Cohen will conjure up the forces of darkness throughout the universe in order to subdue them, in order to bring peace and light to nature, peace and light to the world. Robert Ambalan, in 1942, Tsar Orifer, began to reconstruct the Yellow Cohen, and when he first performed his version of the operation, first there was 8 people doing it with him, next year 16, next year 24, all operating in unison. And this is a big thing in the Cohen, is that when you do these rites, you should all do them at the same time together, ideally. But again, pragmatism is important. When you finally attain that 8th degree of Moses, truly of Moses, the candidate is said to be a conductor of the Holy Ark and a guardian of the gates of the tabernacle. This prepares him, we're just going to glaze over these for the higher degrees, the 9th degree of Grand Elu of Zerubbabel, in which now, as a true Cohen, he can take Israel and bring them back to the Holy Land, which we've seen exemplified in various other rites that descended from this tradition. The Israelites now aren't just historical. They represent the scattered parts of your being, scattered parts of humanity, which you're seeking to bring back to the Holy Land. But it's not without pain. That's why there's skulls in the sash. That's why there's that bridge and the words liberté de passage, the freedom to pass. Liberté de penser, freedom of thought. With sword in one hand, trowel in the other, you must fight off the demons within and without and spread the cement that unites you into one mass, that reintegrates you. This is done in your ordination here. And then you go home and do your personal work in which you have to call forth all these clepotic spirits and subdue them. You have to submit them to the will of deity, much like the second to last week of the Abramelin operation, in which the operator, having prayed for 6, 9, 18 months, depending on the version you're doing, prayed to his HGA for 18 months, now calls upon the forces of darkness to get them to subdue, to place their hand upon the talisman of light, and to put them to the service of deity, thus reintegrating your nefesh with your ruach and your neshama. And then finally, the last degree, 11th degree. I took this picture from Piers Vaughn's Facebook. He says, Willermoz says in Lessons of Lyon, when the minor man, the purified man, has had the pleasure to accept his sacrifice, he made him a junction of the good spirit, purifying it of all its impurities. He restores his correspondence with the divine spiritual beings and gives him the power to operate the virtues as an agent of divine faculties. The most necessary virtue for this item, for this work, is humility. And that is where the classical virtues, the classical symbols of Papuzian Martinism become of extreme importance. These French haute grades have a very rich legacy. From Pasquale, you have the Élus Coëns. You have skeletal catechisms in the Bailot manuscript, which became the Franken manuscript, which eventually became the Scottish Rite. From Willermoz, he revised von Hunt's, I don't think it should have a T, strict observance into the rectified Scottish Rite in the CBCS. This has now spurred numerous Neo-Templar orders. From Saint Martin, he had his Cercle des Intimes, or Circle of Initiates, or Friends. You have the Russian Martinist currents, and then he was the inspiration for Papu's Ordre Martiniste. So these three individuals, these three primary past masters, Willermoz, Pasquale, Saint Martin, left behind a legacy that maybe we're not always aware of, but permeates all of our Scottish, Ecossais, and haute grades. And again, the majority of what we've talked about today is extracted from our new publication we released about 2 months ago, Lessons of Lyon. It's the first time it's been translated to English. They are actual lectures and notes from 3 years of temple meetings of the Lyon Temple, written by Willermoz, Saint Martin, and Dauterive. There's 120 lessons, a 50-page introduction, and it's copiously illustrated. If you've had any of our books, you know that we don't just do a straight translation. We illustrate everything. We draw out every diagram. We make it palatable and understandable. There's numerous correspondence tables, a glossary, a full index, and 500 footnotes operating as a commentary, cross-referencing EC initiations, operations, curriculum, and letter. And this is just a small portion of what has been produced by our college, the Inner Order of the OMS, the College of Superior Inconnus, in which we all meet around a round table as SI, as third degree, and seek to translate together, work together, understand these concepts to bring these primary sources to the 21st century. Here's a brief sampling of some of the publications we have released. These are only the books. These are not just the documents. And ways that we're trying to reinvigorate the Martinist tradition. These are some of our Élus Coëns documents, or books again, not the degrees. There's a whole lot more here if we kept just showing documents. And some of our CBCS and French Rosicrucian series. If any of this is of interest to anyone, reach out to us. We are only interested in serious inquiries. We all have day jobs. We all have a lot of things going on. If you're seriously interested, reach out to us. There's a number of ways to do it. We currently have 13 temples around the world, some more active than others. Some are rather passive at this time. some are very active. And again, here's your resources. You can hold up your camera and it'll take you directly to that website, the link tree, in which you have all of these different things you can see. So link to the bookstore, our free lectures, our Facebook, our website, our free books in academia, and there's a donate button if you like what we're doing. And last but not least, there's a link to me individually if you're interested in following my personal pages and what I'm doing as well. I'm going to leave this one up, though, for the time being. And with that, I think I clocked right at an hour. That's cool. I didn't know we had an hour, but I'm glad we worked that out. And I'm going to open this up if Brother David would like to open the floor to any questions or comments, and we'll see where this leads us.
Okay, thank you so much. And I should say a lot of information, especially for those who are quite newbie to the topic. I've got the last publication for myself. It's very interesting, but it's still to be read, kind of in line to be read, the books. I received them quite well. Very good publication. And before I open the floor, I remind everyone who are still with us